Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Core Studio. Welcome to the show. So the hits just keep coming for the official Kamigawa Neon Dynasty spoiler season. I mean, yesterday we've got... well, Kamigawa completed Sage, the very first Phyrexian Planeswalker that you may or may not be excited to see. And you might not be excited to see that Phyrexian mana might be coming back. That's scary. Anyways, and I just realized I said Kamigawa instead of Tamiyo, and that's embarrassing. Clearly, I was up too early today, and I need more coffee. And speaking of scary, well, Kodama of the Westry can definitely be a very frightening new commander. This thing is insanely powerful, so make sure you check that episode out, but not quite yet. And also check out my episode on Boseiju Who Endures, where I asked the question, is this land way too good? Yeah, we very well might have yet another staple on our hands with this card. But before you check out those exciting episodes from earlier today, make sure you stay tuned for this episode where I talk about a new crazy card called Mirror Box, and I ask the question, how do we break this? Now, before we jump into the episode, of course, you need to make sure that you blame Eddie. In fact, please just blame Eddie in the comments below right now so Eddie can just feel the blame. But on top of that, actually, you can blame Alec as well, because each of them came up with, well, the vast majority of ideas in this episode. So whether you like them or don't like the ideas, or, you know, if I make any mistakes or anything else goes wrong in the episode, make sure you blame Eddie, and yes, even blame Alec. Sure, why not? Okay. Anyways, with all that said, let's jump into it. So, Mirror Box is an exciting, interesting, unique, and pretty strange new card. It's an artifact for 3 that says, the legend rule doesn't apply to permanents you control. So, first off, and we'll get to similar cards to this one, there aren't really many effects at all that deal with, you know, breaking rules essentially, and this is one of them. It also says each legendary creature you control gets +1/+1, and each non-token creature you control gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control the same name as that creature. So yeah, there's quite a lot going on in this 3-mana artifact, and let's break it down. This is not the first card to help you break the legend rule, but it's an extremely efficient one that does so, and it can fit in any deck. Now, breaking the legend rule has a variety of benefits depending on what you want to do with it. I mean, there are certain, you know, let's say, artifacts out there that are legendary that you really shouldn't be able to get 2 of them. But if you do, you're going to have a huge benefit or be able to do some really broken things. However, the more likely application for a lot of commander decks out there is, well, a pretty obvious one. You can get multiple copies of your commander. If you've got things like clones or clone spells, you can get multiple copies of your commander, which of course with certain commanders can be extremely powerful and extremely broken. And again, keep in mind that this says the legend rule doesn't apply to permanents you control, so obviously the legend rule is still going to apply to your opponents, so this is a one-side effect that just is going to benefit you, and most likely your opponents aren't, you know, building around their commander in that way, but if you happen to play against, you know, a clone deck, they're not going to get the same benefits, so just keep that in mind. Regardless, on top of that, you know, for a 3-mana artifact, this also just happens to, you know, pump your legendary creatures, which is also just a nice benefit. So even if you aren't actively breaking the legend rule, that can just pump, you know, any legendary creatures. If this is a legendary tribal deck that you're running, congratulations, this is a good anthem for it that can help out in other ways too. And of course, that last part is incredibly interesting. It says each non-token creature you control gets ++1 for each other creature you control with the same name as that creature. So the first card that this reminded me of was actually kind of like Coat of Arms, but again, one-sided and not including creature types and more so including names. Okay, There are some differences, but again, that's exactly what it reminded me of, alright? Now in this instance, I am very happy that this specified that it is only for non-token creatures. If not, this would probably go in basically any token deck out there that, you know, like, oh, okay, I made 5 soldiers. Wow, they're all massive now. It's really way too easy to get a ton of creatures in play with the exact same name if they're all tokens. You know, obviously, in a format like Standard, or basically any format outside of Commander, which is a singleton format, you can utilize 4 copies of one card. So you actually technically could get in one of those formats with this card, you know, 4 legendary creatures in play that all are the exact same. They're going to get +1/+1, and then on top of that, they're going to get, what, +3/+3 because they have other creatures that have the exact same name. So it'd be overall +4/+4, you know, which seems pretty crazy. And of course, even just with regular creatures in those formats, if you've got 4 of them in play that have the exact same name and they're not legendary, that's, what, +3/+3 still, which is pretty huge. But still, even in Commander, there are actually cards out there that can really take advantage of that last part, and there are some decks out there that are going to absolutely love this card. But before we jump into what those decks are, really quick, I just want to talk about pretty much the only other real cards out there that help you break the legend rule with Mirror Gallery and Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. Okay, or should I say break it in a broad way? Yes, there's something like Helm of the Host, which can make multiple copies of, you know, a legendary creature. But, okay, you know what I mean. Mirror Gallery says the legend rule doesn't apply. It's an artifact for 5, and it's from the original Kamigawa block. So, yeah, this one is just strictly worse in a lot of ways. So I am glad they've got an updated version of this that is just much better and more applicable to a lot of things. Again, this one costs 2 mana more. It only does that first part, and it doesn't even do it as well because it's not a one-sided effect. This one helps everyone. Now again, are your opponents actually going to take advantage of that? Probably not, but maybe. So yeah, it's a good thing that we have an updated version. And then also, even a commander can actually help you break the legend rule with Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. It's a partner commander that is basically a clone, except it's got Sakashima's other abilities, and the ability that matters is the legend rule doesn't apply to permanents you control. So again, literally the exact same first line of Mirror Box. So for a Sakashima deck, you very well might want to have that Mirror Box as a backup in some ways. Yeah, that could be an option. And actually, okay, my apologies for missing this up until this point, but yeah, if you just utilize actual clones like Sakashima and not making clone tokens, obviously then you'd be able to have non-token creatures that are all legendary and the exact same name, so they can get pumped by a ton. So yeah, I guess that is one way that you can definitely take advantage of having clones in your deck and the legend rule not applying and making the most out of Mirror Box. Regardless, the real way to make the most out of it, well, at least in some people's eyes, are going to be these next cards I'm going to highlight. Because in Commander, there are very few cards out there that you can actually have more than one copy of, and of course one that you can have more than one copy of, in fact as many copies as you want, is Rat Colony. It's a 2/1 rat for 1 and a black, and it's going to get +1/+0 for each other rat you control, and of course a deck can have any number of cards named Rat Colony. So even though Commander is a singleton format, Rat Colony is not limited by that restriction. You can have 2 copies, or 3 copies, or you know, in a Rat Colony deck, 60 copies, whatever you want. Just make sure that you include Mirror Box because it's going to make all of your rat colonies absurdly large. Again, first up, obviously, since they're all rats, they're going to be getting +1/+0 for each other rat you control anyways, so let's say that you've got, what, like maybe 10 of them in play, okay? Let's say 10. They're each going to get +9/+0. So now you've got a bunch of, what, 11 ones? So they're still very vulnerable to, you know, even just getting chump blocked by a 1/1, but if they hit, they're going to hit really hard. But if you put Mirror Box in play, now on top of that, since they all have the exact same name, they're each going to get +9/+9. That brings them up to, what, a 2010? So obviously, a lot more of them, if not all of them, are going to survive in combat, and when they hit, they are going to hit incredibly hard. So yeah, I think any Rat Colony decks out there are going to very much be excited about Mirror Box, and, you know, again, pretty much not at all about that first part with legendaries. Another kind of card, and one that is incredibly similar to Rat Colony that is also going to want to consider it, obviously, is Relentless Rats. It's a 2/2 rat for 1 black, so an extra mana on top of the Rat Colony, and it's going to get +1/+1 for each other creature on the battlefield named Relentless Rats, and a deck can have any number of cards named Relentless Rats. So this one only specifically pumps for each card named Relentless Rats, and that's the exact same thing again that Mirror Box does. So yeah, you essentially get +2/+2 for each other creature on the battlefield named Relentless Rats when you've got Mirbox in play. Now again, obviously this deck is going to be slower than a Rat Colony deck, but it is obviously a bit more safe, but again, Mirbox just makes each pretty deadly in its own right. And speaking of deadly in a very funny way, Mirbox can turn your mill deck built around Persistent Petitioners into a Smackdown deck. Persistent Petitioners is a 1/3 human advisor for 1 and a blue, and it has pay 1, tap, target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. On top of that, by tapping 4 untapped advisors you control, target player puts the top 12 cards of their library in their graveyard. And of course, a deck can have any number of cards named Persistent Petitioners. So typically, decks built around this card are pretty much exclusively going to be trying to mill players out, again with that tap ability, again tapping 4 of them for 12 cards. But instead of doing that, well, if you happen to draw Mirbox and you've got a ton of these Persistent Petitioners in play, just drop that and then smack your opponents out of nowhere with some massive advisors that they did not expect to be smacked by. And finally, the last of these cards I want to bring up, and I think actually the last of these actually existing cards that are unlimited in the number of cards that you can include in a deck that are creatures, well, okay, I said that in a weird way. Anyways, Shadowboard Apostle. It's a 1/1 for a black that says, pay a black, sacrifice 6 creatures named Shadowborn Apostle, search your library for a demon creature card put on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So, obviously, a lot of these Shadowborn Apostle decks out there are just essentially built around getting 6 of these out or more, getting some demons out of your library, just tutoring them right into play, and then getting these apostles back, and then doing it again and again and again. But wouldn't it be funny if your apostles actually became more powerful than your demons because you actually got Mirbox out and just said, hey, by the way, now I'm going to beat you down with a bunch of human clerics. So that's definitely a consideration for that kind of a deck as well. Next up again, like I mentioned before, there are plenty of exciting things that you can do with clone effects when it comes to, well, using and abusing that no legend rule applying. Cackling Counterpart is of course a fantastic one, and this one is going to make a token copy of target creature you control, and you can flash it back. Of course, there are certain commanders out there that you would love to have multiple copies of and get some really broken effects, so why not have 3 copies? Or maybe have even more with Progenitor Mimic. It says you may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it has the beginning of your upkeep. If this creature isn't a token, create a token that's a copy of this creature. So if this sticks around, you keep getting more and more copies of that legendary creature to do more and more broken things. And speaking of broken things, of course, there's Red Replication, which is a sorcery that has kicker 5. Create a token that's a copy of target creature. If this spell was kicked, create 5 of those tokens instead. So kick it, make 5 token copies of a creature, you know, like your commander, and just go crazy. And speaking of going crazy, another way to go about this is with cards like Sakashima's Will, Echoing Equation, and Infinite Reflection. Now, these are cards that aren't going to make copies of creatures that you already have, but they are going to turn all of your creatures into one of your creatures. Sakashima's Will says choose one. If you control a commander as you cast the spell, you may choose both. Target opponent choose a creature they control, you gain control of it, and or choose a creature you control. Each other creature you control becomes a copy of that creature until end of turn. So again, by choosing that second one, if you happen to choose a legendary creature, obviously that'd be a poor choice in most situations because all your other creatures would essentially just go away because of the legend rule. But again, with Mirbox, the legend rule doesn't apply. And then on top of that, Mirbox is going to pump all those creatures because they now have the exact same name by a ton. Another way to do this is with Echoing Equation, which says choose target creature you control. Each other creature you control becomes a copy of it until end of turn, except those creatures aren't legendary if the chosen creature is legendary. Now, most of the time that non-legendary clause is beneficial, but actually if you've got Mirbox in play, that kind of hurts you just a little bit again because it takes away that small buff, the ++1 for creatures being legendary. That being said, obviously this is still a very impactful way to turn all of your creatures into one creature and then have all of your creatures become monstrous. Okay, I guess I probably shouldn't have said monstrous because that's actually a mechanic. They become gigantic. It's not a mechanic yet. And of course, Infinite Reflection is another way to somewhat do this. It's an aura that says enchant creature. When it enters the battlefield attached to a creature, each other non-token creature you control becomes a copy of that creature, and non-token creatures you control enter the battlefield as a copy of enchanted creature. Basically, all of your non-token creatures are perpetually one creature, no matter if they're coming into play or if they're already in play. You just get all copies of one creature, and again, with Mirbox in play, that can be a legendary creature as well, which can be fantastic. But another somewhat unexpected direction to take this, and again, a huge thank you to Eddie and Alec for pointing these out, cards like Kamal's Will, Rude Awakening, and Natural Affinity can be a lot of fun with Mirbox. Kamal's Will says choose one. If you control a commander as you cast a spell, you may choose both. Until end of turn, any number of target lands you control become 1/1 elemental creatures with vigilance, indestructible, and haste. They're still lands. And or choose target creature you don't control. Each creature you control deals damage equal to its power to that creature. Now that second part is nice, just taking out a creature, but yeah, the first part is what we're signing up for here. Because let's say you've got a ton of forests in play. Well, they all have the exact same name, which is forest, and now you've turned them into creatures. 1/1 indestructibly vigilant, hasty creatures. But of course, they're not going to be 1/1s with Mirror Box in play because they're going to count all the other forests, and you're going to get to pump them a ton. So thanks to Mirror Box, swing with your massive forest army and decimate your opponents. And of course, you can also do a similar thing with Rude Awakening. It says choose 1, untap all lands you control, or until end of turn all lands you control become 2/2 creatures that are still lands. So this one does have multiple applications. Obviously, untapping your lands can help you out in different ways, but yeah, turn your forest into creatures and smash your opponent's faces. Or maybe turn all lands into creatures with natural affinity, which says until end of turn, all lands become 2/2 creatures that are still lands. But unfortunately for your opponents, again, it's not like a coat of arms effect with Mirror Box, it just helps out your lands. So your land creatures are going to be massive, and your opponent's creatures, well, are just going to be tiny 2/2s that they can decide to block to if they want to, and that's not technically land destruction because, well, they chose to block. Regardless, when it comes to commanders that might want to use Mirror Box, the very first one that came to my mind was Moro Nar. It's a 2/3 rat rogue that says all rats have fear, and by tapping you can sacrifice a rat to put X 1/1 black rat creature tokens into play, where X the number of rats you control. This is a fantastic commander for a rat colony deck or even a Relentless Rats deck, but more so a rat colony deck. Regardless, whichever one you're using with this commander, Mirror Box can fit right in to make your rats absolutely massive. You know, on top of them also having fear, and that you can make even more rats. Have fun. Next up, how about Kamal, Fist of Croza, a 4/3 human druid that has pay a green, target land becomes a 1/1 creature until end of turn, it's still a land, and by paying 2 green, 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 you basically get an overrun effect. Creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until end of turn. So turn your lands into creatures, and again, if you've got lands of the same name, again like forest, cool. They're all massive with Mirror Box, and you can also pump them to give them trample with Kamal. So swing out, decimate your opponents, and also keep in mind that Kamal is, I just want to mention this, a commander that you can utilize in kind of a mean but protective, let's say it, way where you can turn opponents' lands into creatures, you know, if they happen to try to cast a Wrath to stop you from doing what you're doing. That's, again, also not land destruction, that's their fault for casting the Wrath, right? Anyways, how about yet another Kamal with Kamal, Heart of Krosa, a partner commander, a 5/5 human druid that costs 6 green, green. So maybe this is the partner that Sakashima is looking for. Anyways, it says at the beginning of combat, on your turn, creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until end of turn. So again, that overrun effect. On top of that, by paying 1 and a green until end of turn, target land you control becomes a 1/1 elemental creature with vigilance, indestructible, and haste. It's still a land. So again, yet another way, a slightly more expensive way to turn your lands into creatures. And again, you can't target your opponent's lands, but that's okay, and these creatures become even deadlier, again having vigilance and indestructible and haste. And one final land commander to bring up because I think it's fun, Joriel, Empress of Beasts. She's a 3/3 that has paid 2 and a green, tap, discard 2 cards until end of turn. All lands target player controls are 3/3 creatures that are still lands. So again, like the first Kamal that I brought up, you can use this in a defensive way in case someone is going to Wrath the board and you don't want them to, well, there goes their lands. But obviously, in combination with Mirror Box, these 3/3s, which are already pretty big for land creatures, can get absolutely massive again when you've got ones that have the exact same names, like Forest. But now as this episode is coming to a close, it's time for me to give you my final thoughts on Mirror Box. This is a very interesting and unique card, and it does a lot of things that can help out a lot of different kinds of decks. Not allowing the legend rule to apply to permanents you control can be used and abused in a lot of different ways, and again, most notably, and probably for the most decks out there that are going to try this, they're going to be trying to get extra copies of their commander, which again can be an incredibly powerful thing. On top of it, pumping your legendary creatures is nice, but even more effective can be, pumping your non-token creatures that have the exact same name. So for those Rat Colony decks or Relentless Rats decks, or yes, even Persistent Petitioners or Shadowboard Apostles decks, you can win with a massive army that your opponents didn't expect to get that massive with this very unique Mirror Box. But yeah, this is a really exciting and unique card, and I'm excited to see how players are going to be utilizing it. And speaking of exciting cards, make sure you're staying tuned to this channel for even more exciting spoilers coming up. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.